God is not fair, but he is so generous and he is so gracious. And that very well may be the best news that you hear all week. Quick story before we jump into our anchor text for today. A couple days ago, I took 3 of my kids, Eden, Nora, and Lola, to the Huntington Center downtown. And the reason I took them down there is because my very good friend, Mr. Toby Mack, was playing a show in town. Anybody go to the show, by the way? Anybody go to the concert? Some of you guys did. Yeah? Was it fun? Did you guys enjoy it? Tom, did you have a good time? It was a good time. Do you remember that one time during the show, like halfway through, when my good friend, Toby, said from stage, literally, he's like, hey, we love coming to Toledo, but I just want you guys to know that one of the reasons we love coming to Toledo is because my friend Sammy lives in Toledo. Do you remember that? Wasn't that fun? That was my favorite part of the show. I don't know about you. Was that your favorite part of the show? I love that part of the show, right? It was a lot of fun when he said that. And that has nothing to do with the sermon, really. I just felt like letting you guys know that Toby Mack said from stage in the middle of his set that he loves Toledo because I live in Toledo. It's called a name drop. And I'm not sorry if you think less of me for name dropping, because here's the truth, okay? One of the most famous Christian artists in the last 20 years was on stage, and he said that he came to your city because you live in the city. You would name drop too. And so I don't feel bad at all. And again, this has nothing to do with the story. I just like hearing the sound of it, you know. And I'm glad, Tom, that was also one of your favorite parts of the show, because I can't forget that part of the show. On a serious note, though, we got to the show. It was a lot of fun. And one of the first things I did when I got to the show is I texted some of the guys that I knew who were a part of the tour, and I told them, I said, hey, I need you to tell me what signs to look for that the show is about to end. Right? I'm like, I need you to tell me when the show is about to end. I need you to tell me the song before the last song. And the reason I was asking them that question is because I've been on that tour many times with those guys. And I knew that on the last song, Toby has this thing where he brings a bunch of random people on stage and they get to dance and have a dance party. And I wanted to take my kids on stage, and Tom's kids and Joe's kids and some of y'all's kids. And so I texted one of my friends. I said, hey, just let me know. Like, I haven't been in the show in a while. Let me know what song is before the last song so I know exactly when we can come on stage. And I shared that story with you this morning because I think it's a great setup for the text that we're going to look at today. The text we're going to look at today happens because Jesus, his friends, his disciples, they went to him behind the scenes and they said to Jesus, just imagine this. And I love these guys. I love their audacity. They went to Jesus in secret and they're like, hey, we know that the world's going to end at some point and you're going to come back and you're going to redeem all things. But can you give us some insider information on when that's going to happen? Like, literally, they're like, can you tell us how it's going to happen and what's going to happen and what the end of age is going to be like? They're like, just hook us up. Nobody else is listening. We're not going to post it on Facebook. We're not streaming an IG Live. Can you just tell us what the signs of the end will be? And it is in response to that Jesus tells 2 parables, and we're going to look at the second one today. And if you don't know what a parable is, simply put, a parable is basically a short story that illustrates a spiritual lessons. And so Jesus would make up these stories, and the point of these stories was to point to a higher reality. And so in response to them asking what the signs of the end of age was, Jesus tells a parable about how he wants us to live in the gap between now and where God comes back. Matthew chapter 25 is where we're going to spend our time today. If you brought your Bible with you, turn there. We're going to start in verse 14. Again, Jesus tells 2 parables, and we're going to read the second one. And we're not going to get very far, just to kind of throw it out here, but I hope you come back next week when we finish this parable. But listen to what happens. Jesus says this. He says again in verse 14, and by it, Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God. He's talking about the story of God, because they're saying, what's it going to be like when you come back? How are we going to know when the world's about to end? And Jesus tells them these parables, these stories, and he says it's going to be like this. It's going to be like a man who was going on a journey. And he says, and this man called his servants together and he entrusted his wealth to them. Again, he's telling the story. He's kind of making it up and he's trying to make a point. And he makes up this story about this master who calls his servants together and he entrusts his trust to them. And then he says in verse 15, and here's where we're going to spend a lot of our time. It says, to one, the master entrusted 5 talents. Some of your Bibles may say 5 bags of gold, same difference. To another, 2 talents. And to another he gave one. And then it says this, each according to his ability. Then the master went on his journey. I talked about this when we went through the book of Acts, I think several months ago. But I just think it's so interesting that all of my life, like Christians told me that God didn't care about numbers. Then I started reading the Bible. And first of all, I noticed there was a book in the Bible called Numbers. And at first I'm like, well, maybe that's just an Old Testament thing. And then you start reading the New Testament, and you start to notice that over and over again, the writers keep talking about numbers. They keep bringing up numbers. I'm like, I thought God didn't care about numbers. Obviously, God cares a lot about numbers. Case in point, Jesus is telling this parable, and Jesus goes out of his way to let us know that the kingdom of God is like a man who passed out talents. And he wanted to make sure that we understood that he didn't pass out the same talents to everybody. He wanted to make sure we understood that there was a certain number of talents that was given out. I'm going to read it again. It says, to one, he gave 5. Somebody say 5 talents. 5. To another, he gave 2 talents. Somebody say 2 talents. 2 talents. And to another, he gave 1 talent. Somebody say 1 talent. A couple weeks ago, I came home from work, and I think I had a cookie or a donut or something left over, and Lola was a lucky girl, my 5-year-old, to come say hi to me at the door. And so I snuck it to her, right? But when I gave it to her, I didn't do it like this master did. I didn't give it to her in front of everybody, which is what this story is kind of saying. Is like he kind of gave them different talents in front of everybody else. Well, that's not what I do. I pulled Lola aside, and I just snuck it to her, and I gave it to her with specific instructions not to tell anybody, right? I'm like, you cannot tell anybody. Like, she needed to understand that this was just between me and her. And just to make sure that my point, that she, like, to drive my point home, I threatened her to. I don't know if any parents do this. I did. I'm like, this is just between us. You can't tell anybody. Then I looked at her and I said, if you tell anybody, I will never give you anything again. Like, this is it. This will never, like, you are banned from treats forever. Like, literally, I'm like, you can't tell do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? And she's like, yes, I understand. I'm like, do you sure? She's like, I understand, Daddy. Quick pro tip if you don't have kids. Maybe you have kids someday, and you ask them if they understand something, and they will tell you that they understand. But they really don't. They have no idea what you're talking about. Because guess what happened? 2 seconds after I looked this girl in the eye and I made her promise not to tell anybody, she runs in the room, and what does she do? She announces to the whole world that Daddy gave me a cookie, and before I knew it, Nora comes running in the room. Right? And I felt like I was like, on the stand in the courtroom, And she's like, I have looked at the evidence and I have concluded that you are not a fair father. Right? She said, those were her words. She's like, it's not fair, Father. She didn't say father, she said daddy. That would be weird. My kids call me father, Father, right? She did. She's like, it's not fair. Anybody else have kids who are like, it's not fair. It's like, it's not fair. It's not fair that you gave her a cookie and I didn't get a cookie. It is not fair, Mommy, that there are more. This is true. I'm pretty sure one of my kids was complaining one day because she counted the number of chocolate chips in her pancake that her mom made, and she thought her sister got more than she did. Right? She's like, it's not fair. It's not fair that you put more chocolate chips in their pancake than you put in mine. It's not fair that you gave Lola a cookie and you didn't give me a cookie. It's not fair that you did something for them that you didn't do for me. You ever been there? All right, come on now. You ever been, and again, I know I'm not going to ask us for a show of hands or anything because, we like to play it cool and we're at church and we're good Christians for the most part. But come on now. You ever been in a place in your life where you look around to what God has given other people or what God is doing in the life of other people, and you're like, that's not fair? All right, anybody know what I'm talking about? All right, you ever go on Instagram and you see that person post about their 19th vacation in 2023, on 2023, and you're like, we haven't even had 19 weeks in 2023. And you're like, I can't believe it. You roll your eyes so far back, you could almost see your brains. You're like, I can't believe it. And you're a good person. You're not going to post and you're not going to see anything. But come on now, how often have we seen what's happening in other people's lives and we're like, that's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair that they get to go on all the vacations and I don't. Pretty sure I work harder than them. It's not fair that they got the promotion. I didn't get the promotion. It's not fair that their parents are rich. They didn't even have to pay for college. It's not fair that their kids, I did all the things I was supposed to do, and they didn't really seem to really care that much about doing the things you're supposed to do, and somehow their kids turned out all right. It's not fair. It's not fair that pastor's church is bigger than my church. I thought that before. Right? It is not fair that the one guy got 5 times as much talents as the last guy. Right? Isn't that crazy to anybody else? That Jesus is telling the story about the kingdom of God. And Jesus says, this master gives 5 talents to one guy, 2 talents to another guy, and poor Bucky gets 1 talent. Man, I don't know about your kids, but if my kids were there and Jesus was telling them this story, this is the part of the story where one of them would interject or interrupt Jesus and go, that's not fair. All right? I love you, Mr. Jesus, but that's not a fair start to the story. And nobody asked me, but if I were there, like if the master would have come to me, like, hey, we're going to pass out talent. You know what I would have said? 2.6. That's what I would have said. Anybody get it? Ben gets it. 2.6. Right? Give 2.6 talents to the first guy, 2.6 to the other one, and 2.6 to the third one. Because that would be fair. Right? The fair thing, if this guy wanted to pass out talents, would be to give each person, if you got 8 talents and you got 3 people, you give 2.6, 2.6, 2.6. I don't know how they split the talents, but I'm sure he's a wealthy man and he could figure it out. You would split it, but apparently Jesus doesn't seem to care about being fair. Because Jesus didn't have a problem painting a picture of a God that he is comparing to a master who, for some reason, decided that he's going to give someone 5, another person 2, and somebody 1. And if that makes you mad or makes you feel a certain kind of way, then, man, I don't know what you're doing next week. Seriously, you want to mark on your calendar. You want to be here next week because I'm going to read the rest of the story next week. And I promise you the end of the story will blow your mind. Some of you have been in church a long time, and you're like, I already know how it ends. It doesn't matter. Okay, this is one of those parables. I've been texting friends and on my pastor threads, I have all these friends that are pastors, and I've been texting them this parable over and over again because I feel like this is one of those stories where it doesn't matter how many times you've heard the ending. It doesn't matter how many times I've read the ending. The ending always shocks me. Right? It's always shocking to me that Jesus took this story where he took the story, even though I know that's how the story is going to end. It's like when you watch the movie My Best Friend's Wedding. Anybody love the movie My Best Friend's Wedding? Right? I hate that movie. I love it, but I hate it. Julie, you like it? Is it one good? Like, isn't it? Like, every time I watch it, I'm like, I don't believe it ends this way. Like, she doesn't end up with the guy. Right? Am I the only one? Does that shock? And she's like, yeah, you didn't want him to end up with the guy? Like, she was like the main person. Some of you looking at me like, I don't believe you just ruined it. It came out in 1997, okay? Relax, all right? I think I can ruin a movie that's been out that long, all right? Wait till I tell you what happened in Creed 3. Did you know? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I just came out this weekend. I'm not gonna ruin it for you. But I do want to take you back to verse 15 for a second. And I promise next week we'll get to the end of the parable, and it's amazing. But I just could not get past the first 2 verses. And I want to go back, and I want to read it again. But this time I want to ask you a question that I think it's going to break this whole thing open for those of us who read the story. And our first reaction is that, man, it's not fair. Why would the master give 5, 2, and 1? Go back again with me. It says this, that to one, he gave 5. To another, he gave 2. And then to the last guy, he gave how many? 1. Question for you. If we did not know that the master gave 5 to the first guy and 2 to the second guy, would we still think that he was unfair? I want you to think about that for a second. If we didn't know, right? So maybe the master did what I did with Lola when I gave her the cookie. So imagine you're reading the story and you don't know what the master gave the first guy and you don't even know what he gave the second guy. If all you knew was that he gave 1 talent to Bucky, would you still think the master was unfair? What do you guys think? No, right? Probably not. Interesting, isn't it, that if we didn't know that one guy got 5 and the other guy got 2, we wouldn't think that the master was unfair. Isn't that interesting that really, if you think about it, the only reason, okay, and this is massive, the only reason why we think the master was not fair is because we are comparing what he gave the one guy to what he gave to the other people. And what I realized when I was reading this text this week is that when I first read it, I was automatically doing the thing that a lot of us do in life. I automatically began to compare what this guy got with what I got with what that guy got. And not only was I comparing, but I realized that the moment I started comparing what God gave somebody to what he gave to the other people, I automatically became blinded to what God actually gave them. I want to give you guys a context that's going to blow this parable up in your face, okay? And some of you already know this because you have one of those fancy Bibles that tells you in the footnotes under, and if that's you, congratulations for being an overachiever. The rest of us can play along, right? Are you ready for this? This is amazing to me. Historians and theologians and ancient writers tell us that the guy, let's just call him Bucky, who got 1 talent, that 1 talent was actually equal to about 20 years worth of a day laborer's wage. 20 years. Ben, where do you work? TPS. You have to think about that for a second, right? He looked up like, where do I work? TPS. Can I ask you a personal question? Okay, before taxes, how much do you make a year? I'm just kidding. Don't answer that. He actually was thinking about it. He's like, oh, let me do the math. No, I'm not. Just kidding. I'm not going to make you do that. Oh, should we? Should we let him answer? Do it? Yeah? Okay. All right. No, I'm not going to do that to him. But I want you to just imagine for a second, Ben, that you go to work tomorrow, right? And you show up at work tomorrow and the principal or whoever's over you comes in and they hand you a check. And they said, Ben, here it is. I am giving you what you make every year for the next 20 years. How would you respond? Yeah. He's like, we're going to San Diego, babe, right? I mean, seriously, think about it. This guy got 20 years. Let me put that in numbers that you can appreciate, because some of you are like, I don't know how much Ben makes. I don't know if that's a lot or not. Okay, literally, historians tell us that it's 20 years, or it is the modern day equivalent of $600,000. It's a lot of money. Some of you are like, that's not a lot of money. If that's you, God bless you, okay? We're happy for you, all right? Seriously. We're happy for you. But for a lot of us, that's a ton. That's more money than probably most of us will ever see in our lifetime. $600,000. Like, I remember there was a time when my wife and I first, I think, how much was I making when we first got married? $6,500 a year, something like that. Yeah, why are you laughing? I'm serious. She's like, lower than that, less. Thanks, babe. I mean, seriously. Okay, this is a true story, okay? I remember there was a time we just got married, and I was trying to figure out, and some of it was like immigration and all that stuff, and I could barely work. I was mowing lawns, and I would, get to speak in places, and they didn't, this was back when they didn't even pay me to speak. I'm just like, I'm glad I'm here, and I remember speaking at a place, and they did a love offering. Anybody know what a love offering is? All right, this is back in the day. That's how you know you've been in church, when the preacher comes, and they're like, pass the hat, and anybody who feels bad for him, put money in it, And I got a love offering. I think it was like $60 or something. And I was so pumped. And I went home and I was like, yeah, babe. I'm the captain now. I'm like, look, $60. This is amazing. This is above and beyond. We were so excited, and my wife's like, we got to split it. And I'm like, yeah. 90-10, Seriously, it's a true story. We have this conversation all the time. And she's like, 50, because this is like above and beyond. This is like, we're going to spend this money. She's like, 50-50. I'm like, 50-50? Are you kidding me? I did all the work. I spoke. I went to the thing. And she's like, well, I took care of your kids while you were at the thing. And I'm like, good point, 70-30. She's like, 50-50. I'm like, 60-40. She's like, 50-50 and we can make out later. I'm like, deal, done. Right? I'm not even going to look that way. She loves when I tell jokes like that. She's like, our kid is in here. 600,000. Right, do you guys need me to spell it out? Or do you get the point? That is a lot of money. That's a lot to just give somebody. And our first reaction is it's not fair. Isn't that interesting? That our first, or at least maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but my reflex reaction to reading the story is to say it's not fair. And the only reason I don't think it's fair that the one guy only got 1 talent, even though it's equal to 20 years worth of day laborer's wages, is because I am comparing what he got to what everybody else got. So I'm going, I know you got 600 G's, but homeboy over there got $1.2 million, and that guy over there got $3 million, and that's not fair. And I shared that with you because I want us to understand this morning that that's what comparison does. That comparison is deadly to the human soul. I'm sharing this story because I need you to understand that comparison is a silent killer that wants to steal your joy no matter what God has given in your hands. And I have no doubt in my mind that there are so many of us in here that comparison is not only broken into our house, but comparison is eating our lunch. And you want to know how you know if comparison is just rotting you from the inside out? I'll give you a couple examples. You know that comparison has your number when you feel like you're behind in life. Ain't it interesting that if we weren't looking at where other people were, we wouldn't really ever feel like we're behind in life? Right? When you're driving in traffic, the only reason you feel like you're behind is when you see everybody else passing you by. And so you know that you're dealing with this comparison trap when you start comparing what's happening around you, when you start feeling like you're behind, when you start convincing yourself that if only you have what they have, that you will be happier. Which is interesting because that's what you probably said the last time before you had what you have now. Isn't that interesting? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Remember when you were in high school, you're like, oh, man, if I could just move out like everybody else, I'd be so happy. And then you move out and you're like, oh, man, if I could just get married, man, my life would be amazing. And then you get married and you're like, oh, man, maybe if we had kids. And then you have kids and you're like, when do they move out? Right? It's interesting, isn't it, that we have convinced ourselves, a lot of us, that we would be happier if we have what the people around us have. But that's what we told ourselves before we have had what we have now. I think a lot of us, if we're honest, have these if-only scenarios in our minds, right? And if I could pass the mic around the room, everybody has an answer. Everybody has an answer to fill in the blanks. If only blank, man, I would be so much happier. Right? We all have it. You know that thing you have in your mind, like, man, if only I could just, if I had that job that they had, if I could make as much as they make, and I could live in their house, and I could experience what they experience, I could be as gifted as they are. I had the opportunities. If only blank, I would be happier. Call me a cynic, but I just don't think we would. Right? I just don't think having what the people around us have that we think make them happier than us would really make us happy. Now, please hear me loud and clear. I'm not asking us to settle. Okay, and I said this last week, and I'll say it again. God has a role for you in his story that's greater than anything you could ever imagine. Okay, so I'm not telling you not to dream. I'm not telling you to not to have ambition. Okay, because dreams and ambition in the right context are actually from God, and God uses that in his story for his glory. So I'm not up here suggesting that you and I settle. I'm not up here saying, just whatever you have is what you have and there's nothing you can do about it. No, dream big, pray big prayers, trust God for amazing things, be inspired by what you see God do in other people's lives, and ask God to do the same thing in your life. I just want to make sure that we understand that none of that is going to matter if we let comparison into our house, because comparison has a way of blinding you from the value of what you have, no matter what's in your hand. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're the guy who got 5, or if you're the guy who got 2, or if you're the guy who got 1. If you let comparison in your heart, comparison will blind you from what you have been given. Years ago, I heard this quote by Pastor Craig Rochelle of Life Church, and I thought it was so good. He said this. He says, the fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. Woo! I'm going to let you just sit in that for just a minute. The fastest way for you to kill something special is to compare it to something else. I want us to just sit on that for just a little bit, because that's the problem for a lot of us who have convinced ourselves that God's holding out on us. Right? The problem with a lot of us is not that God is in fact holding out on us. No, the problem is that God has been generous to us, but we don't see it because we are comparing what God has given us to other people. And in comparing what God has given us to what God has given other people, we don't realize that we are actually choking the life out of the very thing that we want. And I know this not just because I see it all around me. I know this because I see it inside of me. And it scares me. Can I be vulnerable for just a little bit? Like real vulnerable? Is that okay? You guys promise not to judge me too much? Yeah? Okay. Like 2 people were like, maybe not. The rest of you are like, oh, we'll judge. Okay? And this is one of those vulnerable stories from 1992. You know how sometimes, preachers are like, let me tell you this real vulnerable thing. And you're like, dude, that was 27 years ago, okay? This was last Wednesday. 4 days ago. Okay, and just and I'm not trying to qualify it, but this doesn't happen to me very often, okay? So I don't want you to think I've completely lost my mind, It's been years since this has happened, but it's a true story. This was Wednesday. My wife was finishing up putting the kids to bed, and I shot her a text. I said, I'm freaking out right now. And she didn't answer, and I texted her back. I'm like, babe, can you just hurry up with the bedtime thing? Because I'm freaking out right now. And she came down from the stairs, and right, remember, babe? And I was actually kneeling on the carpet floor with my head on the couch when she came down. And I know some of you guys are gonna think dude, you have issues. I know. I'm getting help. I promise. All right, pray for me. And she's like, well, what's wrong? She probably thought it was something crazy. And I said, babe, I don't know how else to say this. I'm just gonna say it. I said to her, I was just on Instagram, and I saw something. I saw someone doing something, and I'm not going to get into the details because you don't need to know. And some of you are like, give me the tea. No, that's not the point. But I saw something. I saw someone have an opportunity that I wish that I had. And I'm telling you, I don't know what happened, but I just spiraled. I just started freaking out. I just started man, I don't believe, man, am I even any good at what I do, man? Maybe I'm not. I just was in a spiral. I didn't know what to do. One Instagram post. This was last Wednesday. And I'm just sitting on my couch looking at my wife going, babe, I don't know what's happening right now, man. I just feel like I'm losing control of reality. And I'll never forget what she said. She looked at me and she says, you need to remember where you came from and how you got here. She said, you need to remember that you didn't get yourself to where you are. Right? And so I'm sitting here trying to throw a pity party for myself, and I'm looking at my wife, and she's looking at me eyeball to eyeball, and she's like, you need to I feel for you, and then I'm going to be here for you. But boy, you need to remember who you are, where you're from, and what God has done for you and how you got here. You need to remember that you didn't get yourself to this place. And then she said this. She's like, you may want to go check some of those receipts you're asking us to save. I'm like, okay. Okay, I get it. Don't clap. Don't encourage that. You don't get to pull things I said in my sermon when we're arguing back home, you know. I was listening, preacher man, you know. Remember when you told us, save the receipts, you know. I mean, she didn't say it in like a cynical, but she literally said, she's like, you need to go back and you need to look at some of those receipts. And what she was doing is what she was helping me do is what I'm hoping to help you do today. Is that I'm hoping that before you walk out those doors or before you log off today, that you will have, maybe for the first time in a long time, a clear assessment of what God has actually given you. Some of us haven't even, I know you're like, can we get to the end of the parable? No, we can't get to the end of the parable before we figure out the beginning of the parable. And the reality is most of us don't even know what God has put in our hands, because all we've been doing is comparing what we have with what everybody else has. And as long as we keep comparing, we will always be blinded to the value of what we've been given. Yes, the master gave one 5. And yes, he gave another guy 2. And yes, Bucky only got 1. And I understand that may not be fair according to our standards. But can he not be lost on us, Soma City Church, that he still got 20 years worth of a day laborer's wages? Right? Can it not be lost on us that even though he didn't get 5 or he didn't get 2, he still got a whole lot? I said it at the jump and I'll say it again. God's not fair, but he is generous and he is gracious. And I don't know about anybody else, but the older I get, the more thankful I am that God is not fair. Anybody else? Right? I used to be like, I just want God to be fair. I don't say that anymore. And my kids know that too. By the way, I've said this before now. Anytime my kids say, Dad, that's not fair, I'll look at them. I say, do you actually want me to be fair? And they'll smile and run out the room and go, no. Because they know. They know what a lot of us forget. We don't really want fair. I don't want fair. Because fair means that I get what I deserve. And I know myself well enough to know that what I deserve is far less than what I've already been given. And so if you're going to give me a choice between fair and generous, I'll take generous. I don't want fair. I don't want what I deserve. I am thankful for a God who in his sovereignty does things in ways I don't understand, still chooses in that sovereignty to be generous towards me. I don't need God to be fair because God has given me more than I could ever imagine. And I don't know everybody in this room, but one thing I know for every single person that's in this room and probably everybody that's watching online is that God may not have given you what he gave other people, but God has been so generous to you more than you could ever imagine. And if you have a hard time believing that or understanding that, then you need to hop on a plane and go to basically any of most of the countries in the world. And I promise you, 2 hours in most of the countries in the world, you will realize just how blessed you are. I've shared this story so many times, but years ago, Pastor Ryan, some of you guys know him, Pastor Ryan and I and some people, we went to Haiti to visit, to do some work in Haiti. And I'll never forget, and I had been to Haiti many times, and again, you guys have heard me share this story, but I remember pulling into Haiti, and you go to Port-au-Prince, and it's a third, fourth world country, and it's not the same. You fly out of DTW, and you land in Port-au-Prince, and you're like, okay, we're not in Detroit anymore, right? This is crazy. And I remember just looking at Ryan, I could tell that, that he was kind of nervous, because he's like, this is kind of weird. This is a lot of people just coming at you. And I remember just telling him, I'm like, hey, man, like, don't worry, you're good, like, you're good. Like, I'm like, I know a little bit of Creole, I think we'll be fine. I'm like, if anybody tries to jump us or come at us, just let me talk. I'll tell them. If they come to us, I'll tell them, "Mwe bla gla sayo," right? Which is Creole for, I don't know these white devils. I'm like, I'm going to say that. I'm going to be... You're laughing, but I'm serious. I literally went to some of my Haitian friends. I'm like, how do I say I don't know these white devils in Creole? And I learned it, and I'm like, all right, if anything breaks down, Ryan, you're on your own. Peace. I'm out of here. I can blend in with the crowd. You can't. Sorry. Sometimes it pays to be an immigrant. Anyways, so we're in Haiti. I remember we had to get up early, and we had to, get on an early flight, and it was like 6 a.m, and we're driving in the back of this truck, and I'll never forget this image. I just remember looking out at the fields, and I remember seeing this older gentleman, probably in his 80s, and he's just carrying this big old giant thing of, I don't know if it's firewood or something on top of his head, and you could tell by his face that he was old, and you looked at his body, and he was jacked, and you could tell he'd been doing this a long time, and I just remember talking to some of the people who were with us, the interpreters, like, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, that's what they do, and they work in that farm, and that guy's probably been doing that his entire life, and and he's just, and here's how much they make every single day, and I just remember just in that moment, just thinking to myself, this is wild. This is crazy to me that we are an hour from Miami. And there are people who are working harder than probably everybody in this room will ever work in our entire lives. And they make in one day less than you and I make in an hour. I mean, that blows my mind. That if you're in this room right now, and I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're in this room right now, just by the fact that you're in here right now and you can hear my voice, and when I'm done talking, you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive home. You have opportunities that 90-something% of the world will never, ever get to have. Like you are more blessed than most people in the world. That there are people in the world who are not only smarter than you, but they work harder. Some of you are like, I'm a hard worker. I promise you that there are people in Port-au-Prince right now who are working harder than you will ever work. And they make a fraction, not even 1% of what you make. And the reason that is, if you haven't connected the dots, is because God, in his sovereignty, chose that you were going to be born in a country where you have opportunities that most of the world will never, ever get to have. And that had nothing to do with you. Okay, anybody take a pre-birth survey here? Because if you did, I didn't get that. I didn't get that opportunity. Was anybody here before you were born like, hey, Mr. Jesus, I know you're trying to figure out how the world's going, where you're going to put people. Can you just put me in America? Is that okay? Can we just put me there? I love this opportunity. None of us got to pick. It's just God in his sovereignty decided that, Ted, guess what? You're going to be born in a place. And this is not, look it up when you get home. This is no cap. I'm not exaggerating. You literally have opportunities that most of the world will never have. You live in a country, where are my parents at here? Where anybody got parents in here? A lot of parents in here, right? Some of you have kids in here and you're not raising your hand. Come on now, right? There are people, there are, and I don't care what your politics is, by the way. This is not the point. Don't miss the point. Do you know that there are parents in this world who love their kids so much? They love their kid as much as you love their kids, and they will put their kids on a boat. They will stuff their kids in the back of trucks. They will risk death so that their children can have a chance at the life that you were born into. And yet, we're the first ones to complain that God's not fair. Isn't that interesting? That we are in the top 10% of the world. But we don't think God's fair because we're comparing ourselves to the top 1% in the world. And I'm telling you right now, you don't want God to be fair. It is so easy for us to look around us and go, man, I don't have what they have. So easy for us to forget that most of the world is looking at you going, I don't believe God gave them that much. God's not only generous to you, but he is gracious. He's generous and he's gracious. I don't know if you caught it or not, but I thought it was so interesting that Jesus said this at the end of verse 15. It says, to one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2 talents. And then he says this, it says to one, and then it says to another he gave 1 talent. And then listen to this, this is subtle, but this is amazing. He says he gave it to him each according to his, say with me, ability. Isn't that an interesting thing that Jesus threw right there? So what Jesus is saying here is that not only is God generous in what he gave everybody, but he's also gracious in that he made sure that he only gave people what they could handle according to their ability. And I know it's 2023 and we live in a world where it's like, yeah, you can do everything that you want to do. You can't do everything that everybody does. Can we say that out loud? Am I allowed to say that? We were all born with equal value, but newsflash, we weren't born with equal ability. Right? Some of you are like, are we supposed to say that out loud? It's true. If we were born with equal ability, guess what? I'd be in the NBA right now challenging LeBron James. Forget the Prince of Akron. The Prince of Lagos is in the house. Let's go. Well, that's not happening. I have the same inherent value as LeBron James, but I ain't got his ability. I wasn't born with that. Right? I mean, I think I'm a pretty good preacher, but there are some preachers that I will never be as good as they are. Not because I'm not good, but because I just don't have their ability. Some of you are great singers, but you can't do what Kat Miller does because you just don't have her ability. And it's interesting because we were in a staff meeting the other day and Kat was talking about this kid that she mentored in high school, and she taught him everything he knew, and she's like, now he's doing crazy stuff with Beyonce, and she's like, he's so much better than I am. She's like, he has a higher capacity and a higher ability. And so the picture that Jesus is painting here, it may not be very popular, but Jesus is saying not only did the master give them generously, but he gave them what they could handle according to their ability. I promise you that there are people that you're looking at who have platforms and positions, and maybe they run companies or businesses, and you're like, man, I want what they have. And God is saying, it is my mercy that you don't have what they have, because if you have what they have, it would crush you. Like, isn't that interesting? That it is actually, and this is hard for some of us to believe, but it is actually the mercy of God that he doesn't give us what he gave other people. Because if he did, it would cause more harm than good. Right? It's like when you lift weights. Anybody lift weights in here? Anybody lift? Where are my weight lifters here? Right here, a couple people lift in here. Obviously I do. Why are you laughing, Tom? That's just that funny. That's not, I don't get it. And you want to tell me what the joke is? I mean, these guns don't come for free, right? But I'm just kidding. Okay, I actually just started 5 weeks ago, and I asked my friend Ryan to give me a plan, and he wrote me this plan. I don't know anything about lifting. I'm like, I couldn't know. I don't know. I've been guy that walk in the gym and go, I don't know what to do. And so he laid it all out. And it was so interesting. There's one thing he told me. He says, hey, when you lift and you got to do these reps and these sets, I'm like, I don't even know what any of that means. But he's like, just remember, I want you to go up to 8. And he said this. He said, hey, if it's too heavy, if it's too hard for you to get to the 8 rep, is it the rep or the set? Which one is what? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The rep. Okay, thank you. He said, if you can't get to it, if you're trying too hard, then it's too heavy. So you got to take some weights off. And I'm so glad he said that, because I'm the kind of guy with a personality put it all on, load it up, give me more. And he's like, if you try to lift more than you have the ability to lift, it's going to cause damage. It's actually going to hurt you.
And so what God is saying here, the picture that Jesus is painting here, he's saying, hey, God may not do things fairly according to your standards, but I just need you to understand that he's been so gracious to you, that he has blessed you so much. And if you would just stop looking around you, you would truly see the value of what God has given you. And oh, by the way, what God gave it to you in accordance to your ability. In other words, God didn't want to put too much on you that will crush you. And so many of us are comparing and hoping that God will give us things that God knows that we don't have the ability for. And so the master came not only in his generosity, but in his graciousness. He's like, I'm going to give you what you can handle. Right? I know I just gave him 5. I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to give you 2 according to your ability. Imagine a world where you and I decided that it didn't really matter what God put in everybody else's hands. Imagine a world where we're like, all that matters is that he's been so gracious to me. I know that he's not going to give me more than I can handle. Right? That's his mercy in my life. All that matters is that I know he is generous and he's going to give me more than I could imagine. I know that sounds great in theory, but if it's okay with you guys, and again, we're going to finish the parable next week, I want to end this conversation today by challenging you to do something that doesn't come natural. I want to challenge us to be the kind of community that chooses celebration over comparison. Okay, so maybe you've been sitting in the room this whole time going, okay, Sammy, like, that's me, man. I can't help it. I always feel like I'm behind. I always feel like God's holding out on me. I feel like I've been living in this comparison trap, and it doesn't matter what I have. I'm looking around me, the people above me or whatever. Or maybe you're the person looking down at people, because comparison doesn't just work looking up. Sometimes comparison matters looking down. Right? Sometimes we think we're better than everybody else because of what we have. And it's interesting because the guy who did 5 didn't earn the 5. God just gave him the 5. Right? And so maybe you're in the room and you're like, man, I can relate. What do I do? You may not like it, but the prescription against comparison is celebration. If you want to rid your heart of comparison, if you don't want the silent, deadly killer of comparison to kill what God's doing inside of you, to blind you from seeing the value of what God is giving you, if you want more happiness, and Jesus says that in the parable, that we get more happiness, the antidote is celebration. Is that we have to learn to celebrate. We have to choose to celebrate instead of compare. I've shared this story before. This is my last story, and I'm almost done, I promise, okay? By the way, pastors are lying when they say that. I just want to throw that out there. We're really not almost done, but just to make you feel better. But this is a true story, okay? Years ago, right? I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was an opportunity that I thought I was going to get, and it was a really big opportunity. And then that opportunity at the last second went to somebody else. They're like, no, we think this other person is going to we think they're going to do a better job than you will. And I'm not going to lie, I was salty. I was like, man, and I'm competitive too. I'm like, come on. And it ate away at me. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I'm just being real honest, keeping it real. Like there were nights where I couldn't sleep because I was just like, I don't believe that they picked them over me. And then I started to realize what comparison was doing in my heart. And I'm like, I was praying. I was like, God, can you just change me? And God just kind of and I just remember, I don't know where I heard it. I think it was Andy Stanley that said, I heard him say, someone say a long time ago, that if you want to kill comparison, you have to celebrate the object of your envy. Like that's the antidote. You got to celebrate him. And so here's what I did. This is a true story. Okay, my wife's here. She can tell you, right? Here's what I did. I said, okay, I got 1 or 2 options. I can either just sink deeper and deeper into the comparison quicksand, or I can get out by celebration. And you're going to think this is crazy, but I showed up at the event that he got instead of me, and I volunteered to serve. I did. Like one of the people passing out the thing, I could put a volunteer thing on, and people didn't even know who I was. I was the guy that I thought I was supposed to be on stage, and I'm like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to serve. And I did. right? And I served, and I was cheering him on, and I met him afterwards, and I don't know if he knew that I was thinking those things, but man, I just want you to know that I'm praying for you, and I hope you crush it. I hope this is the best event ever. I hope you do amazing. I'm telling you right now, I wasn't feeling that in my heart, right? No, I was just doing that. That was faith. I wasn't really feeling that way. I was still salty, but I knew the only way out of this envy and comparison was to celebrate him. And so I did. I showed up and I served and I celebrated him. And surely enough, God started to change my heart. And it wasn't a one-time thing, man. I keep coming back to that. That's my go-to now. Anytime I feel comparison in my heart, I'm like, I'm just going to celebrate. That's amazing that you went on your 19th vacation in 2023. Woo! I hope you go on 10 more in the next 3 weeks. I mean, it sounds so simple, but I'm telling you right now, the celebration has the power to break the cycle of comparison. And it sounds so churchy, but imagine if we actually pull this off. Imagine if we all said yes to this culture. Imagine if we all said yes to building a culture of celebration. If we said, yeah, if we weren't presented with the choice, we're gonna choose to celebrate people regardless of what God does for them. Imagine being that free. And that was it for me. I'm like, I wanna be free enough. I want to be the kind of free that genuinely celebrates other people no matter what God does for them. Anybody else? Imagine being free enough in your heart that you're like, man, that's amazing that God did that in your life. Imagine being so free that you don't got to look at what you have and what they have. Imagine being so free that people know that you're the first person that people want to call when something amazing happens to them because they know that you're going to celebrate with them. That's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of friend I want to be. I want to be the one friend that people can call when the best things happen to them because they know that no matter how things are going for me, I'm going to be the first person in line celebrating them and cheering them on. Say, go you! That's amazing that you got 5. I pray that God gives you 10. I know I only got 1, but who cares? I still got a lot. God is still generous, and God is still gracious in my life. Imagine a culture, celebration. That doesn't happen because, we have a big revival prayer thing. I'm nothing against revivals and prayers. I think it happens when we choose in the margins. Celebration. I don't know where you are today. I don't know where God has you or what He's given you. But I know that the way forward is celebration. I know that something amazing happens if we all choose that this week. Can we just do that this week? Right? Next time you're on Instagram and you see that thing or you see that person or you see that situation and your heart starts, okay, can you just go, man, God, I celebrate that person. Bless them. Give them more. He gave one 5. He gave another 2. And He gave another 1. It wasn't fair, but He is generous and He is gracious. And you know what the best part of the story is? And I'm done after this for real. Here's the best part of the story. The best part of the parable is that Jesus actually tells us that even though we cannot control what we've been given, there is something that you and I can actually do that will move God to give us more than we have.